The question of why people cease to find the same joy in social interaction often resonates deeply with many. It's important to note that this feeling is far from unique. A significant number of individuals reaching their 60s, 70s, and even 80s observe a gradual withdrawal from social circles that once held great value for them. The root cause isn't a loss of interest in others or the development of callousness and cynicism. Rather, it's a result of profound internal transformations, often stemming from accumulated wisdom rather than weakness. This article will delve into 6 significant reasons why older adults might prefer solitude, even if they were once active and central figures in social life. These observations are not superficial. Each deeply reflects genuine experiences shared by many seniors, yet rarely openly discussed. Some reasons may surprise you, while others might feel profoundly relatable. Nevertheless, one can confidently assert that upon completing this analysis, readers will gain a deeper understanding of themselves and perhaps even extend compassion to their own need for personal space. It will become clear that distancing oneself from certain individuals is not a cause for shame. On the contrary, it may prove to be one of the healthiest and wisest decisions made for one's own well-being. Let's begin our exploration. Reason 1. The burden of past disappointments and betrayals. As years pass, people accumulate not only cherished memories but also invisible emotional scars. Some fade easily, minor disagreements or fleeting misunderstandings. Others, however, leave far deeper, more painful marks, acts of betrayal, hurtful rejections, or moments when an openly offered heart was dismissed or exploited. With age, people begin to feel the quiet, persistent echo of these old wounds more acutely. They no longer open up as easily or carelessly to others, not out of malice or resentment, but because they've learned a crucial lesson: not everyone deserves a central place in their lives. Consider the story of Eleonora, an 81-year-old woman who, in her younger days, joyfully hosted dinner parties every weekend. She genuinely relished the laughter, music, and the vibrant feeling of a home filled with people. However, over the years, the situation drastically changed. Her circle of friends gradually narrowed. One close friend deceitfully betrayed her trust, while another vanished from her life after Eleonora's husband passed away. This wasn't a single crushing blow, but rather a continuous stream of minor yet accumulating disappointments. Now, Eleonora often prefers solitude to noisy company. It's not a dislike of people, but rather that she has come to value inner peace and sincerity far above any pretense. In old age, a person develops a unique protective shell, a shield forged from life experience. This formation isn't always pleasant, but it often becomes vital. Having lived long enough to witness how quickly people change or disappear from one's life, an individual begins to guard their time, heart, and trust more carefully. This isn't about being cold, but rather about sensible prudence. Older adults have often loved deeply, given generously, and faced betrayal without warning. This recurring cycle teaches them to pause, carefully assess situations, and retreat when something feels unsafe or insincere. They begin to pay less attention to the words people speak and more to their own feelings after those people leave their space. Psychologists refer to this state as relationship fatigue, where the emotional and energetic cost of maintaining connections begins to outweigh the joy derived from them. This phenomenon is particularly common among those who have experienced significant emotional upheavals and storms. There is absolutely nothing shameful in such a choice. It merely indicates that a person has lived a rich life, witnessing all facets of human nature, both bright and dark. And when, in their current stage of life, they choose to distance themselves, it's not out of bitterness or resentment. It's a manifestation of deep wisdom. It's the realization that their heart, at this point in their existence, is something sacred and inviolable. And far fewer people deserve free access to this treasure. Reason 2. A preference for peace over aimless chatter. In their youth, a person might have been more tolerant of meaningless conversations that lacked deep substance or purpose. These could be exchanges filled with mere pleasantries, idle gossip, or simply noise for noise's sake. However, with the onset of maturity, this tolerance gradually wanes. Such a change doesn't mean the individual becomes antisocial. The essence is that they begin to recognize the profound and undeniable value of inner peace. Silence is no longer perceived as emptiness. Instead, it feels like a powerful source of rejuvenation and energy. And when a person reaches such a level of inner tranquility, it becomes significantly harder to sacrifice it for superficial and shallow interactions. Take Harold, a 76-year-old man who once had a successful career in sales. He was always exceptionally charming, highly sociable, and could effortlessly strike up a conversation with anyone. However, he now consciously avoids events that require prolonged and, in his opinion, meaningless interaction. Harold no longer attends large family gatherings unless he genuinely feels prepared for such engagement. When asked about his reasons, he simply replies, "I'm tired of just talking." His choice is driven not by a desire for isolation, but by a search for meaning, authenticity, and quiet moments that don't demand him to perform or pretend. With age, one's emotional energy becomes a far more precious resource. The desire to impress others gradually fades, as does the need to prove anything, to oneself or to others. Instead, a deep yearning for authenticity emerges. People seek interactions that feel genuine, not like pre-rehearsed scripts. And if such authenticity cannot be found, many will prefer to stay home with a good book and a cup of tea rather than fill a room with noise that ultimately leaves them feeling even more alone than before they arrived. This is not arrogance, but rather selectivity. There is undeniable dignity in carefully choosing your environment and the people with whom you are willing to share your time and space. One has earned the right to conserve their energy, prioritize inner peace, and decline invitations without guilt. This is not avoidance, it is maturity. The more people listen to this inner intuition, the clearer they understand that a crowd is not necessary for a rich and fulfilling life. Sometimes, one deep and meaningful conversation, or even a quiet evening spent alone, brings far more satisfaction than hours of forced and superficial interaction. So if you've noticed yourself withdrawing lately, opting out of empty banter, or skipping noisy gatherings, know this: you are not becoming colder. You are becoming clearer. Clearer about what truly nourishes you and what, conversely, drains you. And this clarity is one of the greatest gifts that aging brings. Reason 3. The feeling that others no longer understand. In everyone's life, there comes a moment when they look back and realize that the world around them has changed, and they too have undergone transformations. Modern slang is different. Values have shifted. The pace of everything, from conversations to expectations and even the nature of relationships, seems almost dizzying. And amidst all these rapid changes, a person can begin to feel invisible, unheard, or simply out of place. This isn't because they've done anything wrong, but because people no longer take the time or have the desire to truly understand their life journey and experience. Consider the example of Marie, a 79-year-old retired teacher. She always loved spending time with her younger relatives, sharing stories from her rich life, how she raised 5 children, managed a household, worked full-time, and still found time for volunteer activities. However, these days, she says, young people hardly ask questions. When she starts to speak, they politely nod but constantly check their phones. This isn't maliciousness, but rather a simple disconnect. And over time, this gap begins to feel like an insurmountable chasm. This is one of those quiet reasons why older adults start to withdraw. It's not that they don't care. It's that being in an environment where they are not truly heard or understood becomes extremely exhausting. And gradually, they begin to prefer their own company. Not because it's better, but because it's safer. They know how deeply they feel, how much they've experienced, what wisdom they carry. But when others stop seeing it, it becomes easier to stop offering it. This solitude isn't so much about being physically alone as it is about feeling misunderstood. A person can be surrounded by many people, yet feel completely unnoticed. They share an important thought, and the conversation immediately shifts. They express a concern, and they're labeled overly dramatic. After enough such moments, a person begins to believe that perhaps silence is the easier path. Psychologists call this emotional invalidation, where a person's feelings are subtly dismissed or minimized. And this phenomenon affects many older adults far more profoundly than is often acknowledged, because it manifests not through direct rejection. It occurs through many small moments that accumulate over time. But here's the truth: a person's thoughts still matter. Their voice still holds power. And just because others aren't hearing it doesn't mean it has lost its value. It simply means they've outgrown certain conversations and interactions. And that's perfectly normal. Sometimes the solution isn't to force your way into their world. It's to find people or places where you don't have to explain yourself so much, where your mere presence is enough, where someone truly listens instead of just waiting for their turn to speak. And when such people are few, it's natural to withdraw to protect your energy and find solace in your own space. Because in that space, you are fully seen and accepted by yourself. And that should never be a source of shame. Reason 4. The fear of becoming a burden. With age, a quiet but persistent fear begins to take root within a person. It's not a fear of illness or even death, but the fear of becoming a burden to the people they genuinely love. It's an apprehension difficult to articulate but impossible to ignore. A person doesn't want to interrupt someone's busy day. They don't want to ask for help, even when they desperately need it. And so, they choose to remain silent. They stay home. They keep their distance. This isn't pride. It's love. It's preserving one's dignity. It's a reluctance for their presence to be felt as pressure or a burden on those around them. A person begins to decline invitations not because they don't wish to go, but because they don't want anyone to feel obligated to drive them or provide another service. They hesitate to share their experiences not out of distrust, but because they don't want to burden others with their worries. And thus, their world gradually and imperceptibly begins to shrink. Consider Frank, an 84-year-old widower who used to regularly spend weekends with his daughter's family. As his mobility declined, he increasingly declined their invitations. When asked why, he replied, "I don't want them to rearrange their lives around me. They have kids, jobs. I'll just slow them down." And while his family never gave him reason to feel unwelcome, the fear of being a problem outweighed his desire to connect. This is the paradox many older adults face. The more a person needs others, the less they want to need them. The more they value relationships, the more they hesitate to ask for help. After all, their whole life they've been strong, caring, the one others relied on. And now, asking for help feels unfamiliar, perhaps even shameful. This fear is rooted in something deeply human, the desire to be loved not out of obligation, but out of joy. And when a person feels their presence might cause inconvenience, they begin to retreat. They would rather be alone than feel like a burden. However, here's the truth: people who genuinely love want to be there. They may not always express it perfectly. They may not always do it ideally. But a person's worth is measured not by their independence, but by their presence. And if the people around them truly care, their needs will never be a burden. They will be a privilege. Nevertheless, the fear persists and shapes behavior. A person remains silent when they want to speak. They stay put when they want to visit. They hold back when they want to join. And gradually, avoiding people becomes easier than risking the discomfort of needing them. Reason 5. The quiet ending of old connections. Some relationships don't end with loud arguments or emotional goodbyes. They simply fade. People evolve in different directions. Priorities shift. Life pulls them apart slowly, almost imperceptibly. Initially, there's no intention to distance, but it happens. And one day, a person wakes up and realizes that the people who once filled their calendar are no longer part of their daily life. This isn't always sad. Sometimes it happens peacefully, but at other times, it leaves a kind of ache, as if one has outgrown something they once loved very much. They recall shared meals, phone calls, common laughter, and wonder where it all went. Did they change? Did they themselves change? Perhaps both. Recall Ruth, a 73-year-old woman who used to take weekly walks with her best friend from school. Over time, these walks became monthly, then yearly, and then stopped altogether. There was no argument, no disagreement, just a quiet realization that they no longer had much to say to each other. Their lives had diverged. Different interests emerged, different rhythms. Ruth said, "We still care about each other, but I guess we've said all there is to say." This experience is far more common than people realize. Relationships built on shared life stages, raising children, working together, living nearby, often don't survive when those stages end. And as a person moves into later life stages, they may find themselves surrounded by people who no longer align with who they are becoming. This is not a failure, it's a form of growth. When a person begins to prioritize their time and energy, they naturally become more selective about whom they spend it with. Not because they are better than others, but because they are clear about what they need. And sometimes they just need space. Space for reflection, for introspection, for simply being. Old friends who once energized them may now feel draining. Conversations that once flowed freely may now feel strained. And instead of forcing themselves, a person chooses distance. Not out of malice, but out of self-respect. People often say that aging means losing people. But they don't always say that sometimes, a person lets them go by choice. Because they've learned that closeness without true connection can be lonelier than being alone. So when a person withdraws from certain individuals, it doesn't always mean avoiding others. It means respecting the changes happening within them. They have evolved. And that is something to embrace, not apologize for. Reason 6. The joy of one's own company. At a certain point in life, a person stops actively seeking crowds and begins to genuinely enjoy solitude. This happens not out of bitterness or a feeling of loneliness, but because they have discovered something many people never learn: their own company is perfectly sufficient. A certain kind of peace envelopes a person when they realize they no longer need to explain themselves, entertain anyone, or pretend to be more or less than they truly are. For years, they may have been surrounded by others due to work, family, and numerous responsibilities. And in those years, they likely rarely had a moment to simply be, to sit in silence, to hear their own thoughts without interruption. And once they finally taste this freedom, it becomes sacred. It's not something to run from, but something to protect. Consider Gerald, an 82-year-old man who once lived for social noise. His home was a constant gathering place, his voice the loudest in the room. But in recent years, he finds more joy watching birds from his porch than hosting parties. When asked if he feels lonely, he smiles and says, "I have enough stories in my head to keep me company for days." What he has discovered is not loneliness, but a deep contentment. This shift often confuses those around them. They might worry. They might think a person is withdrawing due to sadness, but in reality, they are simply tuning into something deeper. To a rhythm that is quieter, but richer. To a life that is less crowded, but more full. A person no longer feels the need to fill every silence, explain every choice, or be available to everyone constantly. And this is not avoidance, it is wisdom. It is the inner clarity that only comes after years of noise, giving, and straining oneself for others. Solitude, when chosen consciously, becomes a sanctuary. It is a place where healing happens, where reflection deepens, where the true self is given space to breathe. And the older a person gets, the more they realize that some of their best days involve no one else at all. They walk at their own pace, think their own thoughts, do what they enjoy. And for the first time in a long time, they feel free. Not because the world has changed, but because they have finally taken their true place within it. Concluding thoughts. So, what resonated with you most today? Which of these 6 reasons felt familiar, as if it were written with your life in mind? Perhaps it was the quiet ending of old connections. Or maybe it was the realization that your desire for peace no longer needs explanation. Whatever it was, I hope it reminded you of one important truth: you are not broken. You are becoming. Distancing yourself from people doesn't mean you are bitter or antisocial. It can mean you are wiser. You have lived decades of experience. And those years have given you the right to be selective, to guard your peace, to respect your own pace, and to find meaning not in the noise of others, but in the quiet knowing of yourself. There is dignity in solitude. There is strength in boundaries, and there is true freedom in no longer needing to prove your worth through popularity or endless interaction. If you have been withdrawing from people, take a moment to ask yourself why. You may find that what you were seeking was not an absence, but harmony. And let this be a reminder that even in your stillness, you are seen. Even in your silence, you are heard. And even in your solitude, you are never truly alone. Because there are countless others, just like you, walking the same path with grace, courage, and a deeper understanding of what truly matters.